Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, this is Ed DeVoe. I'm the president of the New Jersey Cannabis Business Association, welcoming you to yet another in our series of Lunch and Learns. I want to thank our corporate sponsors, Inglesino, Webster, Rickscala, and Taylor, Burton Trent Public Affairs, our platform hosts, ABS and New Jersey Buzz, and a special thank you and a pre-greeting to Ansell Grimm, our corporate member who is going to lead us in today's Lunch and Learn. Before I hand it over to my colleague, NJCBA board, Dr. Bay, just again, thank you. Please do go to our website. Do check out membership opportunities. It's your membership that allows us to host programs like these to benefit not only the membership, but the industry as a whole.
Thank you, Ed. Glad you joined us for the introduction today. This is a great panel that we've put together today. I know that there are a lot of questions about what's happening in New Jersey, form that the law takes, what are the programs going to look like. Same thing is going on in New York. And when I contacted Josh Bauchner from Ansell Grimm and asked him to participate in this, we talked about topics. Josh said that he thought that social equity in New York and New Jersey would be a good topic, and I agree. So I'm going to sit back now and let Josh introduce the other panelists and start up. I want everybody to know that we are recording this, and everyone will get a link. Everyone who's in attendance will get a link to the recording of this, and will also receive the chat file. So if you're worried about trying to get down all those emails that people are putting in that, don't be worried. You'll get something following this session. Thanks, and over to you, Josh.
Thank you, Marianne, and thanks, Ed, for the introduction as well. Good afternoon, everyone. It's my pleasure to be with you here today to discuss social justice and equity in the cannabis industry, particularly focusing on New Jersey and New York. As many of you may know, the New Jersey Cannabis Regulatory Commission held a meeting earlier this week. That was lights out, literally and figuratively. They lost power in the middle of the meeting, which was kind of an interesting experience, but it was on the topic of social justice and equity. It went on for hours. Very, very important issue in the cannabis space, and we're happy to be discussing it here with you today. First, let me introduce Lisa Reid with Mercury. And Lisa, if you want to give a little bit of an introduction for yourself, your role in the cannabis space, particularly in New York.
Thank you, Josh. And thank you, Josh and Zachary and Marianne and Ed, for inviting me to this important panel. And thank you to the New Jersey Cannabis Business Association and all that were involved in sort of lighting the path to make legalization possible in New York. So thanks for being first. I am a managing director with Mercury Public Affairs in New York. We are an international lobbying and public affairs firm. We are in about 11 states and Europe and Mexico and Turkey, etc. I have been involved in the cannabis industry for more than a decade in New York. So we like to say before the beginning. We take a lot of pride in ownership and authorship of the medical marijuana program. And while it was not perfect in its initial inception, not the bill we wrote, over time it has gotten much better. And as you can see in the MRTA in New York, the expansion of the medical program is significant. And so that looks more like the original bill that we authored. Once we set up that program, we pivoted to adult use, and we've been doing that ever since. So we're very proud of our new bill and hope that we can be helpful here and make some new friends.
Thanks, Lisa. And I'm also pleased to introduce my colleague at Ansell and Aaron, Zachary Windham. Zachary, if you don't mind, introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about your background.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me here. I'm an associate with Ansell, Grimm, and Aaron in the cannabis law practice. Previously, I was in-house as the legal director of a marijuana business operator in Colorado. MBO is a license classification because we're going to talk about today There are different licenses for different activities in all the different states. Even New Jersey and New York are pretty different. So my focus, my skill set really is licensing and regulation. I've been poring over these laws. There's a lot in them, and there's a lot more to come in the regulations that I am looking forward to getting soon enough.
Thank you, Zachary. And briefly, again, my name is Joshua Bauchner with Ansell, Grimm, and Aaron. I am chair of our firm's Cannabis Law Practice Group. I was also appointed to chair of the State Bar Association's Cannabis Law Committee, which I'm very excited about for the new term. My colleague Lisa Gore at the Lens firm. So very exciting opportunity lies ahead for everyone. And with that, I think we should turn to the presentation if we have. Okay, so just briefly by way of background, and then I'm going to have Lisa and Zachary explain a little bit more. As most of you, I'm sure, know, social justice and equity component is a driving force behind both the New Jersey adult use legislation, CREMA, and the New York adult use legislation, MRTA. And the legislative intent in both bills was paramount and set forward, as you can see here, and rightly so. As we'll discuss a little bit, there's a remarkably disproportionate impact on minority communities over the years through the prosecution of marijuana laws. And as it's now becoming legalized, people recognize that is frankly unjust. And so appropriately, there's a significant movement here to right that wrong. We can go to the next slide, please. So these are the different license types available for in each state. I don't really want to get into the license types too much here today, but I did want to just have it as an introductory mechanism to establish a baseline for everyone's understanding. All right. Zachary, can you discuss a little bit, please, the impact zones in New Jersey?
Yes. So in New Jersey's law, CREMA, they have established these impact zones, and they've set out a criteria for the impact zones. We've got these criteria here written out. I'm not going to go through them. It is a lot of, sort of checking back and checking forward. You can, if you just look at what the classifications of class of counties are, you can find that list. It has to do with like population level and proximity to the Atlantic Ocean. But the big thing here is that these impact zones will be targeted with the revenues that are coming from the taxes for it. And there will also be consideration for businesses that are either proposed to be in impact zones, or alternatively, if you reside in an impact zone and you have for 3 years, and you find a spot for a business that isn't in the impact zone, there still will be consideration for the fact that you, as an impact zone resident, are bringing money eventually into the impact zone. And that is sort of like the short of impact zones. We'll talk a little bit more about them when we talk about considerations on the applications.
Next slide, please. So Zachary, what are the impacts here with respect to ensuring that the legislation and the award of licenses is having the appropriate impact from a social justice and equity perspective?
Well, so, in New Jersey's law, they talk about 30% being the goal for social equity licensees. And these are going to be people who are minority women-owned businesses and also service-disabled veterans. Annually, they're going to be reporting on what really the makeup of the market is, so they can track how they're meeting that goal. Just briefly, that 30% in New Jersey and it's 50% in New York, those are goals that they're going to be measuring their success on. I read an interview last week. It seems to be an idea floating around that these are guarantees or promises. That's not the case. It is something we want to shoot for, but nobody is going to have their application denied for the sake of keeping these percentages in place. Nobody is going to have an application approved just for the sake of meeting these percentages. So that's going to be the annual report. In the biannual report, they're every 2 years really going to be looking at the market itself and how it is getting supply down from cultivators to the stores and the producers. They are already doing a biennial report for the medical licensees that exist now, the alternative treatment centers, they call them. So if you want to look and sort of get a feel for what those things will be, you can do that. You can also see some recommendations that were made in 2019 that I'm hoping will be sort of implemented and factored into the eventual licensing. But that is going, and this is going to be how they decide where to focus funds within the program to help promote these owners.
Thank you. Next slide, please. All right, Lisa, can you please tell us a little bit about the New York analog to all of this?
So again, as Zach pointed out, 50% is expected to be the social equity applicants. There was a real strong effort by the legislature to ensure that we went sort of farther than any other state has gone on the social equity front. There is a 2-year look back where they will report on how things have shaked out as it turns to the in terms of social equity. All applicants, if you're not social equity, are required to develop and implement a socially responsible framework as part of their application. So while you're right that the 50% is the goal, I think every applicant is expected to show a level of social responsibility in their application.
Definitely.
Next slide, please. So Zachary, they came up with a short name for this office. I actually can't recall it. Jeff Brown had indicated he was going to try to truncate it. But what exactly is happening at the CRC in New Jersey with respect to these issues?
So this Office of Minority Disabled Veterans and Women in Cannabis Business Development, I made a really long acronym that I can figure out something for at some point. But this is really going to be responsible for monitoring the progress and coming up with ways to implement processes and programs to get closer to what the goal is, and to maintain the goal. We wouldn't want the first 2 years to be 30% and then have half of those folks cash out because various reasons, and then we're back down to 15%. Like, that is not the long-term goal. The long-term goal is to give folks the opportunity to establish generational wealth and really be a long-term player in the industry. They're going to be looking at various ways they can help going forward. Once it's really in place and they have the funding, this does create kind of a chicken and the egg problem of, like, how do you get the funding in there if the funding is coming from the taxes for the industry? But eventually they're going to be able to provide direct support to applicants that would qualify as minority or women-owned businesses. And I am hopeful that it won't be too long before we can get to that 30% number.
Thank you. Next slide, please. All right, so perhaps a more convenient and truncated name for this in New York, Lisa. What's happening there?
So the truncated name is OCM, Office of Cannabis Management. It's a new office that will be housed in the SLA, our state liquor authority. The Cannabis Control Board will be responsible for creating the regulations with the advisory board, giving their recommendations. There will be a chief equity officer to ensure that the diversity is happening as it should be. One of the things that we think is, and we take pride in New York, is the fact that the current registered organizations, I'm not sure what you refer to them, but the medical license holders, the 10 medical license holders in New York, will be required to pay a fee in order to participate in the adult use market. That fee will create a fund by which the state will give loans as part of an incubator program to social equity applicants to help from everything from capital to licensing to doing their applications, etc. So we're really excited about that opportunity. The Cannabis Control Board will set that rate by which ROs will have to pay a fee in order to participate in the adult use market.
Thank you.
On that real quick, New Jersey doesn't have a fee set out in the legislation the way that New York does, but the option is there. They could do it, and I think that would be a great way to get some funding for social equity applicants in advance rather than having to wait for rec sales to start. That's all.
Well, you anticipated, Zachary, a question that just came up in the chat. So, well.
Yes, I do expect that
Yeah.
will be the case. There's no reason they can't, and it's easy money.
Right. So, what are some of the application considerations here, Zachary, in New Jersey, with respect to these issues?
So the social equity application considerations, obviously there's going to be, if you have the minority or women-owned business enterprise status, but that's just one aspect. And again, don't bet the farm on that. Don't try to get creative with your structure just to meet that qualification. There are many other opportunities for you to demonstrate that you can be a good applicant for the purposes of creating social equity within the industry. Your community impact plan within your surrounding area, your workforce development plan, you'll have opportunities to really promote equity in your workforce, and that can be just as important as who the individual owner is. They do mention in New Jersey an affiliation with a prisoner re-entry program. I found that to be very interesting because it kind of goes hand in hand with the expungements that they're incorporating, but I've not seen anything like that, and I'm hoping that some applicants and licensees will be willing to get involved with that, because it's tough to apply for a job and say, like, I just got out of prison, but it's fine because it was a charge that was expunged and it's not actually a crime on paper anymore, but you still have to explain what you did for the last couple of years as an employee on your application. Labor peace agreement, both New York and New Jersey are requiring these for the full size licenses. Don't know what New York's going to do as far as micro and stuff goes, but this is not a requirement for a micro license in New Jersey. You don't have to have it in place when you apply, but you do have a 200-day time limit where if you're issued a conditional license and you haven't gotten a labor peace agreement in place by then, they're going to revoke the license.
Thank you. Well done, Carl, on the slide. And so, yes, Lisa, tell us what's happening in New York with respect to these issues, please.
Yeah, very, very similar to New Jersey's model. So same MWBE, distressed farmers, anybody with a cannabis conviction or a family member that has a cannabis conviction, any additional points for minimizing your carbon footprint, and labor peace agreement will be required for all licenses.
And so now, what is this incubator program that the New York has
So the
started?
incubator program is the program that is funded by the RO's ability to enter the adult use market and create this fund that will allow for social equity applicants to get everything from capital funding to assistance with how to set up a business plan to writing applications to any sort of entryway that gets folks in ownership positions for a license in the program.
Zachary, again, in New Jersey, these impact zones, how do applicants target them, and what are some of the considerations in doing so?
So, like I said, there's obviously the putting a license in an impact zone, and there is going to be a priority to have at least 2 licenses in each impact zone. It could be more, no reason to think that it's just going to be limited to 2, but if the choice is between a impact zone license, 2 impact zone licenses, and one would be 3 licenses in one impact zone, and the other one would give 2 split, they will go for the 2-2 split because they need at least the 2, but they could still do 2 and 3. If you don't have an impact zone, if you don't have an opportunity in an impact zone, but you're a resident of an impact zone, you can also get a license outside of the impact zone, and there will be consideration for the fact that you're a resident in an impact zone. And additionally, if you just have a license that borders an impact zone, you don't live in an impact zone, but you can come up with a plan to hire 25% of your workforce from the impact zone, that's either the closest one or immediately adjacent, you can get additional consideration for your application in that way. This slide, I'll just jump right into. I put it up. It's some specific quotes, but the point is that after the rules are done, the CRC has to do a meeting in every county of New Jersey to explain the rules and the application process to everyone. And they also have a 30-day deadline in the law to start accepting applications. There's 21 counties in New Jersey. I'm concerned about their ability to hold 21 meetings in a 30-day window. And so I've been encouraging them, you need to start this education process a little sooner than that. Don't just like stick with the 30-day deadline. But everybody be on the lookout for these information sessions when they come, because they will be required at least 30 days before the applications are accepted.
And Zachary, a question came through in the chat. Is there a current list of towns considered impact zones?
So there is a current list in the sense that you can look up the town populations based on the 2019 data that they use. You can also find out which counties fall into what classes. And so I guess the short answer to is there a list is no, but the long answer is you can create the list yourself. It's all find outable more definitively than which towns will or won't opt out at this point.
Right, and I think the New Jersey League of Municipalities is doing some work as well, both to track impact zones and the opt-outs for certain municipalities. Another question before we get to the micro-business licenses, an assumption that the delivery license in New Jersey, presumably in New York as well, will be the least expensive. Am I right or wrong? So Lisa, I'll go to you first in New York. What's the cheapest license?
Oh. I'm going to take a guess here. I think the cheapest license is going to be delivery.
And why?
I think we designed the delivery license to be sort of the easiest access route for social equity applicants. That's the idea. It doesn't take a lot of overhead, right? You got 25 people in a van and you're good to go. So that was the thinking behind that. And just to back up on the opt-out piece, in New York, the cities, towns, and villages have until the end of the year, December 31st, to opt out. They can always opt back in, but they're not allowed to opt out after the end of the year. And it's by city, town, and village, not by municipality. And we built the tax structure in to incentivize city, towns, and villages to wanting to participate. So it's 3% tax to the city, town, or village that hosts, and 1% to the county.
Thank you. And similarly, Zachary, in New Jersey, delivery license, the least expensive entry point?
I think that in terms of application fee, the answer is yes. I have seen some local municipalities that are looking to try to both bar delivery licenses from being located there, but also require a license to deliver into the county or into the city. I am not sure how that is going to go or if that is going to hold. I know that in Colorado and some other states that would not fly, but it might in New Jersey. If that gets added, that could add a substantial, just unexpected fee that you would still want to be aware of. But if we're in a vacuum, the delivery license will likely be the cheapest, because you are essentially just licensing yourself to make pickups for people from a licensed store and bring it back to whoever bought it.
And to build on what Lisa said, the opt-out for New Jersey expires August 21st.
Yes,
So,
the opt-out in New Jersey is a little bit sooner, so we will have a more definitive timeline of when people are either opting out or opting in. They can opt in whenever they'd like to, like in New Jersey. But I believe that if you opt in or you are opted in, you will not be able to opt out for 5 years. And additionally, if you do opt out after those 5 years, you can't kick out already existing licenses. You can only opt out of new licenses.
right. And for those who've been involved in this for some time, through the medical marijuana phase, excuse me, New Jersey, any town that did opt out historically, that opt out was negated by the new legislation. So they'd have to opt out again. So for those in the chat who are wondering what's going on, your sense of wonder is appropriate. It's a bit messy right now, but obviously it's developing. All right, so
I just want to clarify one more thing. Our opt-out, I don't know what Jersey's is, but ours is only on retail and on-site consumption.
Jersey's is any license. You can opt out of any license class. You can opt out of all license classes. You can just opt out of some license classes. They have a lot of leeway as far as what they can opt out of.
and interestingly, and this is probably troubling, a lot of townships are now developing their own kind of cannabis regulatory commissions at the township level, where they're trying to implement a structure for to review the licenses within the township. We'll see how that goes. It's arguably usurping the role of the state CRC, but some of these townships seem to be wanting to throw their hat into that ring. Reasonably, they could possibly do it through a planning board or the zoning board of approval. New Jersey's got many layers, but that'll be an interesting new component to all of this if you get approved by the state and then have to go and seek approval from that township and risk not getting approved. Obviously, it creates a little bit of tension. All right, micro business licenses. This is Jersey, so Zachary, please, a little bit on the micro business licenses, which I know are a significant component of CREMA.
Yes, so in New Jersey, micro business licenses are not their own licenses. It's a class of license, and it spans all of the licenses. So you'll have micro cultivators, micro processors, micro warehouses, micro or wholesalers, micro distributors, all the classes. This is a part where in the law it is a requirement. They do say shall insure, and so 10% of each class of licenses will have to be a micro license. Right now, the only license categories we have a set number on are cultivators. And so with the 37 cultivator licenses that will be available, there's going to be at least 4 micro cultivators, but there's no cap on the number of micro cultivators. So this is a scenario where I think that as long as you are qualified, it will be treated as a unlimited licensing aspect. They also, in addition to the 10% of each class, there has to be 25% total licenses have to be micro licenses. So some categories will have, 10% are micro, some categories will have 40% are micro. If you ask me, I would say that it's more likely micro retailers are the most prevalent micro license, but it could be hindered by zoning stuff at the local level. The fee will be half that of the regular licenses. We don't know what the regular fee is going to be, but we do know the micro license will be half. The ownership is going to have to be 100% New Jersey for the past 2 years. I know a lot of people have a lot of properties all around the New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York area. So just wherever you put on your IRS tax return for the last 2 years as your state address, that's the one they're going to expect. They're going to check. Don't try to put your vacation home as your residence and think that they won't know. No mutual ownership. So this is going to be interesting with how it plays out for micro wholesalers, because in New Jersey, the license is actually attached to the facility, and in New York, the license is attached to the licensee. So For a wholesaler in New Jersey, the license is for the warehouse. And if you can't have a micro distributor license as well, I'm not sure what you can do other than let people bring product to your warehouse and store it, but then they have to come and get it as well. Because the distributor license is for the actual bulk transport of cannabis. You will be able to convert your micro license to a full license. So this is a good way to get in. And then if you want to grow in the future, you know, you can convert. You'll just have to meet the requirements of the regular license. Big thing will be the labor peace agreement. You don't have to have that for the micro license, but if you want to convert, that's going to be a requirement. 10 employees. So the 2,500 square feet, I don't know that 2,500 square feet and 1,000 plants is the most efficient way for a micro cultivator to operate. I don't know that you can. If you grow 1,000 plants well, you're going to need more than 2,500 square feet. And if you're fitting in 2,500 square feet, you're not going to have 1,000 plants. Or if you do, they're going to be less than. But for the other things, 2,500 square feet is plenty of space. You can run, and 1,000 pounds is a lot of marijuana. If you are unclear or you think that's not a lot, like 1,000 pounds is 1,600 ounces. No, it's 16,000 ounces, excuse me. And so then you multiply it out by the ounce prices that they have on the biennial report, and it's plenty of money for somebody with 10 employees. I saw an article that TC's in New Jersey has a 6,500 square foot retail store. Amount of space, it's not necessary. Nobody needs 6,500 to retail or dispense cannabis.
Thank you. A vertical integration in New York. What's that?
Yeah, so our micro businesses look very different. In addition to the current 10 license holders, the MRTA allows for 3 additional medical registered organizations, and then has micro business licenses, which is the only other license in the state that will allow you to be vertically integrated. So you under that one license, you will be able to do everything. We have not yet crafted the regs. We're doing it now around size and scope and what that's going to look like. New York really prides itself on its craft beer industry and anticipates that the micro licenses will look very much like craft cannabis.
All right, excise fees. So here we go, where the state's getting their pound of flesh. What's going on in New Jersey, Zachary?
There is an optional social equity excise fee that can be placed on the alternative treatment centers. So not the alternative treatment centers, on the retail and recreational adult use licenses. It will not be applicable to the cannabis transferred within the ATCs for medical use, but it will be applicable to their recreational cannabis. It's not required, but I have yet to see a state not take the opportunity to collect tax revenue on any sort of cannabis transaction. So I would just assume this is baked into whatever other pricing is going to have to happen. So here is a description of how it's going to be spent. This is just sort of like very general explanations, and it's very general in the law. They will get into more specifics. The money is going to be targeted at impact zones. The money is going to be targeted to assisting with the expungements and all of the legal fees that are going to go into sort of like undoing all of the harm that has been done by the war on drugs. And they will have to be more specific as it goes. This will also be included in the reports that they'll be making. So looking forward to finding out more about how this works out.
Right. It is going to be interesting to see how they try to remediate past wrongs that we discussed at the outset of the presentation. The use of some of these taxes and funds. It's a remarkable turn of events, and hopefully CRC and New York will put it to good use. So continue, please.
Here, here's a little more detail about how the money will be broken down and what it'll go to. The Department of Health oversees medical marijuana right now, but it's all going to be under the CRC once this is done, both medical and rec. I guess, since we're mentioning that, New York's law incorporates CBD hemp into their organization as well. It's under the same umbrella. And I do expect that that's going to be the long-term trend. I don't think that people are going to continue having CBD regulated by agriculture departments or departments of health if the cannabis industry becomes a full-fledged countrywide national thing.
Lisa, New York, same concept. What's going on over there?
Same sort of concept, except New York, the tax capital of the nation. We just wanted to take it one step further and tax the amount of THC, because if things couldn't get any more complicated, that's what we'd like to do. So you can see that there's, I think it's 5 cents on flour, 8 cents on concentrate, and 3 cents on edibles. 9% goes to the state, and 5%, actually it's 4%, goes to the local. I think one of the other things that really sets New York apart is that we actually put in a percentage of the revenue that must go to social equity, community-based organizations, expungement, education. 40% of the revenue must go to that. And New York is the Black and Puerto Rican Caucus will be very closely watching this as it rolls out.
And Lisa, I know you've been involved in this for quite some time. Sorry, could we go back to the prior slide, Carl? What was the impetus behind taxing it that way by the level of THC? Because it seems to be, as you pointed out, the most confusing mechanism for doing so. It's hard enough doubling your tax when you want to tip your waiter. How are you going to tip your bud tender with such a complicated mechanism?
It's a very complicated mechanism. What was the thought? The thought was, we're New York, and so why shouldn't we just tax everything? Texas was a very long, lengthy discussion. I'll say this, the executive, the governor and his shop is, this is not their sweet spot. They don't put a lot of political capital behind the cannabis program overall. This was really the legislature saying we need to capture what we need to capture to be able to put enough money back into the community and really fund that 40% at a level that they thought was fair and equitable. It's really what it came down to.
So there's obviously going to be a huge market then, I would imagine, for labs.
Huge market for labs.
Right.
And we're in desperate need of labs in New York. Our one lab is completely overloaded and overburdened, so we are looking for labs. That'll be another sort of easy entry point.
Right. New Jersey's similarly is a little bit, but the labs are in short supply, but we don't have that THC concentration taxing piece that's going to really dictate so much of the revenue. And speaking of revenue, Lisa?
Yep, so there's the breakdown. 40% for grants to eligible school districts, 40% to the Community Reinvestment Fund, which is about social equity and giving back to disproportionately affected communities, and 20% to drug treatment and public education. So
someone asked when we might expect to see some movement here. These are the deadlines in New Jersey and New York. So you can see the deadline for the rules is August 21st in New Jersey. And then I believe it's, 30 days after that, Zachary, that there's applications?
Yeah, applications are supposed to be accepted 30 days after the rules are finalized.
Right.
I will warn you all now, as you probably know from what's going on in New Jersey with the medical applicants, when deadlines are missed on this kind of thing, there's a little bit of a shoulder shrug and what are you going to do? It took longer than it took. If you try to push them on getting a response, the answer will often be well, okay, based on the information we have, the answer is no. So these are hopeful deadlines. I think that everybody's motivated to meet them. I know that in New Jersey, the ATCs that exist now will be able to do rec sales on that same like August deadline if they can prove they have a sufficient supply for all their medical patients. I'm less confident they will have that supply than I was before after reading the biennial report, because it just seems like there's some cultivation issues going on there in terms of like their output relative to their capacity. But you know, it's an ideal deadline, and if it's missed, you know, it is what it is. If they take longer than 90 days to respond to your application and approve it, I would not go to them and insist that they give me a response. I would just say, hi, how much longer do you think it'll be?
Right. Well, I mean, I think you're right. These are optimistic in New Jersey. I would push everything by at least a quarter, you know, towards the fourth quarter of this year. You know, when they had the first Cannabis Regulatory Commission meeting, Jeff Brown put up an organizational chart for the commission. And there were probably 20 different positions on the chart, none of which were filled, including, you know, I think 3 or 4 legal positions. So they have to populate the commission. They've got the commissioners. That took a long time. They have their executive director, but I think the rest of the commission, all the staff, they're still hiring. And obviously, until they are fully populated with staff in that org chart, it's going to be hard for them to do what they need to do. So the legislation, as you point out, CREMO sets forth a lot of these deadlines, but I think you're exactly right. It's going to be reasonable that there's going to be a lot of delay. There's obviously a public comment period. With respect to the rules, that might change things. And I would expect hopefully fourth quarter of this year. And then, of course, in the midst of doing all of this for adult use in New Jersey, they're also still scoring the 2019 applications. They're expecting now the latest report is maybe June on that, although in April they said May. So, you know, as Zachary pointed out, they have the luxury of kicking it down the road. And then, of course, the 2018 applicants that won the appeal are resubmitting. And so there's a whole scoring process underway with that as well. So when you consider that the very limited staff at the CRC is dedicated towards 2018 and 2019 scoring, it's you know, adult use is, I think, probably a little bit of a back burner. And as they explained at the first meeting, the focus continues to be on medical appropriate. They want to ensure that the medical demand is met by supply, and that there's not it's not bled to the adult use market. So a lot of work to be done in New Jersey. And then New York, a little bit of a different game in New York. They give themselves a little more cushion. Lisa, what are your expectations there?
So there's current conversations happening about folks that will be appointed to the Cannabis Control Board. We expect that those appointments will be, they need to be confirmed by the Senate. So we expect that to happen in the last week of our legislative session, which is mid-June. And from there, you know, the regs are being drafted now, so we're hoping that the regs can get up and running. You know, people may be aware that there's some political investigations happening here in New York, specifically around our Department of Health. So that may delay things a bit. And again, as I've said before, that the executive, this is not really his sweet spot. But there's a lot of push to really get this program up and running. We are working on trying to get the medical expansion that is referred to in the MRTA out the door sooner because we are running concurrent compassionate care bill and the MRTA at the same time. So, you know, there's a little bit of wiggle room there to try and stand up the medical program more strongly so as to not have it be swallowed by the adult use program.
So, you know, we have a little bit more time if there's some questions, but I just wanted to let everyone know again, I think Marianne mentioned at the beginning, this presentation, as well as a couple of articles that we prepared are going to be available to you. And for those who don't know, you know, the social justice and equity component in cannabis legalization anywhere is of paramount importance. The history behind cannabis being a Schedule I narcotic is founded in explicit racism. It's undeniable. Originally under the Marijuana Tax Act, an individual very boldly and proudly explained that he wanted to tax marijuana because he wanted to target the African American community and punish them for it. And so that was in, I think, 1931. And then when Nixon was president, which is when the CSA was passed, he also, obviously everything was on tape, but he had two targets that he wanted to prosecute, the African American community and the hippie community, neither of which really got support. And so folks who were in his administration, Roger Stone, H.R. Haldeman, John Dean, all have, explained that the whole reason he pushed cannabis as a Schedule I narcotic was because he wanted to make it completely illegal under the false premise that it has no medical viability, which obviously we now know today is a total fiction. And cannabis is likely a panacea for a lot of conditions. I'm a firm belief that if cannabis were legal, we wouldn't have an opioid crisis in America. It's a non-addictive pain treatment, among other things. And if you want to be world famous, be the first person to overdose on cannabis, you'll be front page news. So it's a really scathing history here. And again, the racism is expressed in so many regards. So while all of this is happening in the States, and while now the administration is taking a hands-off approach, it'll be interesting to see if Congress finally turns things around, if the FDA and the DEA finally turn things around and try to deschedule cannabis. I know a lot of folks are of different minds on that. Obviously, once the federal government gets involved, it just makes things worse. But and the states are doing, for the most part, a phenomenal job. We'll have to see if the Safe Banking Act and the MORE Act gain some traction. They got through the House and they can do everything in the Senate. But I think when people are confronted by the truth of why we're even having this discussion today, why cannabis was illegal for so many years, why we're now just starting in New York and New Jersey, two states of significant population on the East Coast, why only now in 2021 we're getting this off the ground, is because of that historic racism. And so that's, I think, ties into the whole purpose of our presentation today, and why I think both statutes in New York and New Jersey really do have this tremendous focus on social justice and equity and righting those wrongs and providing some of the tax revenue to those demographic communities, and not punishing people who had low-level nonviolent marijuana offenses, expungement, and the rest. It's long overdue. So with that, Lisa, any parting words?
Again, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it, Josh and Zach and Marianne and Carla and Ed. Please, feel free to reach out if you have any additional questions about New York. We're here for you. We welcome all of the New Jersey players. Come across the border, get yourself a license, let's stand up the program and help each other out. Thanks.
And Mercury does have an office in Trenton, right?
We do, yes.
Excellent. Zachary, parting words?
Parting words would be to temper expectations on what federal legalization will look like. The alcohol industry is very different from state to state. I'm originally from Louisiana. You can buy rum and tequila at CVS in the main aisle. In Utah, you can only get beer up to 3% at the grocery store, and anything else is at a liquor store. So when federal legalization does happen, expect that states will continue to fiercely protect their industries and try to give their own communities the opportunity to really participate. And that would be my main thing, is just understand that federal legalization is not going to be a free-for-all.
And invite the audience to connect with New Jersey Cannabis Business Association. We're there to answer questions. Next week, our speaker is going to be Stacey Udell from HBK Financial, and she's going to be talking about taxation in the new industry.